What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Glory UGA podcast here on YouTube. I'm Tyler, and this video, as always, is brought to you by our great friends at MyBookie. If you enjoyed today's content, make sure, guys, subscribe to this channel. Go ahead and do it right now. Like, comment, all those things, guys. It really is a huge help as I continue to try to grow this YouTube channel after doing the audio side of things for 10 years. But all right, with that, let's go ahead and dive right into what I want to talk about on today's video, which is the Georgia wide receiver room looking ahead to the 2025 season. I'm sure by now, all of you are well aware of the Colby Young legal situation update. I guess news hit, last Wednesday? But finally, Colby Young's long percolating legal situation has reached its resolution. It's essentially, 12 months probation, a fine, and he should be good to go to play football somewhere next year. I think that somewhere will be Georgia. We'll get that here in a few minutes. But since the news hit that Colby Young had to reach that plea deal, I've been thinking a lot about Colby Young and the potential for him to play for Georgia next year, but also the Georgia wide receiver room at large heading into the 2025 season. Look, guys, all of you, if you just watched one single Georgia football game last year, even if you're not a Georgia fan, for some reason you're watching this episode, if you just watched one Georgia game, let alone all 14 of them like I did, like I'm sure most of you did, you know, there's no mystery. You well know that there were major issues with Georgia's wide receiver unit a year ago. I would argue that Georgia's wide receiver play was so deficient as to constitute the single greatest weakness on Georgia's 2024 football team. Some might disagree, and that's fine, guys. Like, I hear you. I know offensive line play, especially offensive tackle play, wasn't great. There are other positions that certainly did not play to the standard that we typically see from Georgia football teams. But at the very least, even if you don't agree with me that it was the single greatest weakness, you have to agree it was a weakness of sorts. I would argue, however, again, that it was the single greatest weakness that the Georgia football team had a year ago. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the issues that Georgia had on offense related back to the wide receivers. I know that we could not run the football. Again, you don't need me to tell you that. You saw that firsthand all year long. We ended up 15th out of 16 teams in the SEC in rushing offense for a Georgia offense that's quite frankly unacceptable. I know a lot of people want to blame the offensive line for that. And sure, they bear some culpability. A lot of people want to blame the offensive coordinator. And sure, Mike Bobo bears some culpability there. But to me, maybe the biggest issue, one of the biggest reasons why we had issues running the football was our wide receiver play. Hear me out on this. Teams' defenses were able to defend us this year in ways they just simply have not been able to in recent years. They did not have to sit back and play a too high safety shell. Why did they not have to do that? Well, there's no Brock Bowers to worry about, number one. You don't have to double him. You don't have to try to completely rework your defensive structure to take that guy away. There's no Lad McConkey to be a bash brother, essentially, with Brock Bowers there. You didn't have guys like that to contend with. You didn't have guys that could just create separation on their own, not consistently, right? And so defenses, they became aware of that pretty quickly. Go back to the Kentucky game, guys. Kentucky, I think, they really exposed some of the issues we had at wide receiver, the way they defended us. Go back and watch the tape on that game, guys. Go back and watch it. Remember how many unblocked defenders they had? Like, we had so many issues running the football. Now, Mike Bobo could have done some more holding backside ends and probably should have kept running the ball right into a wall over and over again the same way that we did all game long. But a lot of those plays were being made by unblocked defenders. Were some of those the function of offensive linemen missing blocks and not knowing who to block, missed assignments? Sure, a couple of them, but sometimes, guys, it's the safety coming out as an unblocked defender, and they were able to do that because they had no respect for our ability to hurt them down the field, or really any part of the field whatsoever from the wide receiver position. So I do firmly believe that while we had a number of issues last year, clearly that was the single greatest issue that we had, the Georgia wide receiver room. But good news here, guys. In the span of a little over a month or so, Kirby Smart and James Coley have completely flipped Georgia's wide receiver room. So much so that I think you can make an argument that we had taken what I believe, as I've laid out, was Georgia's greatest weakness last year and turned that into a strength. Potentially. We don't know yet. It's February 2nd right now. But potentially the strength of the Georgia offense in 2025. And hear me out on this, guys. All right, let's think about the other units on the offense heading into 2025. The offensive line, which did not play well for most of last season, but there were a lot of injuries there. We're playing guards at tackle for most of the year. But we do have, we're going to have at the very least, 3 new starters on the offensive line. Now, I'm hopeful that those guys are ready to play, to step into bigger roles and do a really good job. And we've recruited fairly well at that position. I still have some concerns about tackle. I think Monroe Freeling, who just underwent shoulder surgery, I think him getting back healthy in a year of taking a lot of those reps with number one offense, I think that he will be the best version of himself, the best version of Monroe Freeling that we have seen. I still have questions about right tackle, Ernest Green. I know I came on here last week and said he's probably going to be the opening day starter at right tackle if I had to guess right now. That scares me, quite frankly, because Ernest Green, he just doesn't have the feet right now, man. I think he's more of a guard. He's certainly not a left tackle. Maybe he can function at right tackle, maybe. I think the ideal situation would be one of those younger guys, whether it's Bo Hughley, Jazar Jackson, somebody that has more athleticism and has better footwork to be ready to take that position, ideally. But the offensive line could be improved next year, could be, but that's a big unknown right now. We're going to have, at least 3 new starters. Tackle play still questionable, still concerning there. And you got quarterback. I'm hopeful that Gunnar Stockton and/or Ryan Puglisi, whoever it ends up being, probably Gunnar Stockton, is elite for us. I hope that's the case, but I don't think we can sit here right now based off what we know February 2nd, 2025, and say beyond a shadow of a doubt that our quarterback play is going to be the strength of the Georgia offense. I hope that ends up being the case, man. I really do. I'm pulling hard for Gunnar, and I like Puglisi too. I hope he does well, but I don't think we can say that with a straight face right now based on what we know to this point. And then running back, I love Nate Frazier. We all love Nate Frazier. Nate Frazier should have gotten a lot more opportunities last year, in my estimation. And he'll be back, and he'll be a better version of himself next year. I fully believe that. But behind Nate, we got some questions at running back. Cash Jones is back. I love him out of the backfield on third downs. Guy was a major weapon for us in that role situationally this year, but he's not an every down kind of back. That's just not what he does. And we should be getting Branson and Roger Robinson back from injury, but what version of them are we going to see? I don't know. There's questions there. I mean, Branson's been dealing with injuries for almost 3 years now, man. It's been a minute. And Rod was banged up all last year, had a great spring practice, and then got banged up, and it is what it is. But there's some unknowns there. There's some questions there. So I think if you look at the other units, if you throw tight end in there, I think tight end will be a strength of the offense as well. I think getting Oscar Delp back, Lawson Lucky back for a third year, I think he's going to take even more strides this year. I like Jaden Riddell potentially working himself in the rotation. Get Ellis Williams, 6'7" freak. I love Ethan Barbour. Young guys, you don't know what to expect from them, but that unit should be really strong as well. But I think if you look at the wide receiver room as a whole relative to the other positions on the Georgia offense, I think you can make a really strong argument that it might end up being the strength of the Georgia offense in 2025. And even if it's not the strength, I think it will be a strength. I don't think it will be a massive weakness, an albatross around the Georgia offense's neck the way that it was in 2023. And let's think about it, guys. Why do I think that? Why am I so high on this Georgia wide receiver room in 2025? Think about what's been added to that room, okay? Think about it. Think about this for a minute. You got Noah Thomas coming over from A&M, 6'6", a contested catch master, the same way that Colby Young was coming last year, but we all know how that ended up turning out. And look, as I know that Noah Thomas's numbers don't blow you away when you look at them on paper coming from A&M, but you got to think about the context. Let's be a little nuanced in our thinking here, guys. The quarterback play at A&M over the last couple of years, let's just be real, has left a lot to be desired, whether it was Connor Wegman, whether it was Max Johnson for a minute there, whether it was Marcel Reed at times this year. They all had their moments, but there was so much inconsistency at that position really for the last, 2 or 3 years. So I don't know how much to put on Noah Thomas there. This is a guy that I think has some versatility. I think obviously with the size at 6'6", pushing like 230, he could play X. He could be an alpha X receiver for sure. I've been pretty open with that. I think he can also play some Z. I think he has the athleticism, the speed to be able to do that. So I like the positional versatility there. And I think this guy's best football is ahead of him. I think you get him into a system with more competent, more consistent quarterback play. And I know our quarterback play is still to be determined. We'll see. But I think at the very least, I would say with our quarterback play, we have a high floor. The ceiling remains to be seen, but I do think it'll be more competent, more consistent quarterback play than Noah Thomas has had to work with in his career. So I do expect to see a huge jump from Noah Thomas in 2025. I think he'll be a big-time player for Georgia. Then you look at Zachariah Branch coming over from USC, who I think is a prototype at the slot receiver position. He's just straight up electric with the ball in his hands. Now, his first 2 years in college, he was a work in progress as a receiver. He came into college as a 5-star, do everything athlete, returner, just a dude you want to get the ball in his hands some way, somehow. But he had to learn to play the receiver position, and there were fits and starts there. Like there were really some high moments. There were some moments like, okay, well, dude, you still have to develop. So that's certainly true. And again, like Noah Thomas, his numbers at receiver don't necessarily blow you away. Like I know Caleb Williams was there 2 years ago, and that guy was elite, right? Former Heisman Trophy winner. But that was Zachariah Branch playing as a true freshman, right? And they had a number of other receivers that were upperclassmen that year that were playing ahead of him. But last year, when you want to see him take another step as a sophomore in year 2, you have Miller Moss throwing you the football, who summarily got benched a little bit more than halfway through the season. So again, like with Noah Thomas, there were some quarterback issues there certainly this year for Zachariah Branch to work with. But he also needs to continue to learn to play that position, continue to develop. But I do believe, a lot like Noah Thomas, that Zachariah Branch's best football is very much ahead of him. Again, just get the dude the ball in space, and he is going to make plays for you. We all know how much Mike Bobo likes the screen, right? And Dom Lovett, really talented player, did some really good things for us. I really appreciate what Dom gave us for the past couple of years. But running a screen with Zachariah Branch, as opposed to like Dom Lovett, who was really good again, but just different. Zachariah Branch is a lot more electric with the ball in his hands in space. So I'm very excited about what he brings to the table. And you got Sokovie White. Even if Zachariah Branch does end up being the guy that I think he can be for us this year, you got Sokovie White, who was one of like the forgotten guys in the 2024 recruiting class, who's just a football player, man. Like he didn't actually get a ton of playing time this year, but I'm telling you, this dude in year 2, he's just a grinder, man. He's a guy that's just going to work hard all offseason. Kirby spoke about him directly, mentioned him by name at SEC Media Days. It didn't end up working out for him this year because we had Dom Lovett there, and Dom was a leader on the football team, so it was hard to get guys like Anthony Evans and Sokovie White on the field. But why do we feel okay letting Anthony Evans just walk out the door? Well, because we feel good about Sokovie White. So I think we're really strong there at the slot receiver position. And now, the genesis of all this, what instigated in my mind, potentially you throw Colby Young back into this equation. Now, I know there's no guarantee. Like we haven't heard officially if Colby Young will be back in a Georgia uniform next year. He's really got 3 options. He could be back in a Georgia uniform. He could enter the transfer portal in the spring window, or I guess he could do the NFL supplementary draft. That would be an option. I don't think that's his best option, but I think it's an option. I think he'll end up back at Georgia. Here's why. When he was cleared of wrongdoing by Georgia's Title IX office a little bit more than halfway through last year, well, guess what? Like right before the Texas game, I want to say it was. When he was cleared there, he was allowed, I guess right before, no, it wasn't right before. At some point in November, right? When the Texas game, I think that's when we actually heard he wasn't going to be able to play. Anyway, when he was cleared by the Georgia Title IX office, he was allowed to come back to practice. I think that's big, guys. That's big. I know the solicitor here in Athens kept pressing charges. Now we know they've reached a plea deal, negotiate all that, right? It's resolved. But he was allowed to come back to practice, and he chose to come back to practice. He could just throw up his hands and say, screw this, man. Like, I'm done. I'm going to go somewhere else next year. Why am I going to practice? I'm almost certain I'm not going to be able to play this year because my legal situation is still pending. So it doesn't look like this solicitor is going to drop the case. So I'm just going to go somewhere else and go work out, and I'll find myself in the portal next year. He didn't do that. He came back and practiced with the team, even though there was really no chance that he was going to play the rest of the year. I think that's huge. And right now, you can look it up, guys. You'll look it up online. He is currently enrolled in classes in Athens. Now, that doesn't mean that he won't still enter the portal when we get to the spring window. Anything's possible. We're talking about NIL, the portal these days. I know that, right? Like you can't bury your head in the sand. Like that's certainly possible. But I think all the signs right now are pointing towards Colby Young being back in the Georgia uniform next year. And if you throw him back in the equation with Noah Thomas, those are 2 guys, again, I think both those guys had the potential to be like legit alpha X receivers in the way that Georgia hasn't really had in some time. But Glad was awesome, which is a different kind of receiver, right? Both those guys are contested catch masters. We had a lot of issues winning 50-50 balls this year. We just didn't really come down with many of them. Those guys are the dudes that can do that for you. Colby Young was, think about early in the season, guys, before he had his legal situation pop up. Who are we trying to get the football to in the red zone in the pass game? It was Colby Young. Why? Because he's the guy that we have on the roster that could go get the football like that. And now you got two of those. I think Noah Thomas is even more of a contested catch guy than you see in Colby Young. But both guys can do it. So now all of a sudden, you got two dudes, especially in the red zone, where we had some issues. You go back to the Sugar Bowl, we get down the red zone in the second half, get a chance to really get back in this football game, and we were trying to throw fades to Nitro Tuggle, right? Who I think can be a good player for us too as well. Like, that's another guy to factor in, could take another step for us this year. But you throw him in just to throw a fade, and he wasn't really quite that guy. You try to throw it to Lawson Lucky, but he's not Brock Bowers. We didn't have those guys when we needed it, right? Well, we got two of them now. And you get in the red zone, who you doubling? You double both when somebody's getting single coverage, man, on the inside, whether it's tight end, slot. I mean, that's tough, man. Running backs. So we're going to put defenses in a lot more stress than we were able to a year ago. Now, how this will work out, who's going to play X, who's going to play Z, will they both play the same position? I think if Colby Young does come back, again, I think there's a really strong chance he will. I think you got to get him and Thomas on the field at the same time, personally, if you're asking me. And so, again, I think Thomas probably is going to end up playing Z. I think he's got a little bit more athleticism than Colby Young does. You can play him at Z, you play Colby Young at X, you got Zachariah Branch, Jacoby White in the slot, and then behind your top two guys at Z and X, you got Nitro Tuggle, again, who I think is going to be a very good football player. There's a reason why Georgia fought so hard to keep him from entering the transfer portal and get him back on this roster. He's a talented player, and in year two, you like to think that he is going to take a big jump. And then you throw this in there as well. Georgia just signed maybe its best wide receiver class ever. Like, literally, guys, maybe ever. Arguably the best receiver class that Georgia football has ever signed. Taylon Taylor, 5-star. I think the final updated rankings came out for all those different recruiting sites. He ends up right now, according to the On3 industry rankings, at number 23 overall, 5-star prospect, 6'1", 175, got some positional versatility. I think he's more of a Z or a slot guy, but he can certainly be a big-time player for us. He's the kind of guy that's just such a smooth operator. His ability to create separation, man. Like, this is a guy to get out there and give Georgia reps right away. C.J. Wiley from here in the state of Georgia, Milton High School, big-time high school in the state. Top 100 guy in his own right. I think he could have pushed for 5-star stats, ended up at number 89 overall. He brings something a little bit different than Taylor. Wiley's 6'4", and long, and really athletic in that frame as well. 6'4", 210, long, athletic. Another contested catch guy that you can throw in there as well. Landon rolled in from North County High School, dude that I absolutely freaking love. I'm an Athens local. He plays over at North County in Watkinsville, which is, 20 minutes or so away from me. I've seen this guy play multiple times in person. The dude can straight up fly. I know everyone's compared to Ladd McConkey. He's a little bit different than Ladd. Not as shifty in a short area as Ladd, maybe not as precise of a route runner, but a good route runner, but faster than Ladd. Bigger than Ladd was coming out of high school, more put together than Ladd was, and I think faster in a straight line. But this guy can absolutely give Georgia something as a freshman. I always hesitate to say, hey, we're going to count on a freshman. I don't like to be in that position. But any of those guys, Taylor, Wiley, Roldan, Blackshear, Tyler Williams, the other two that aren't as highly rated but are really good receivers in their own right, this is a killer wide receiver haul in this 2025 class. And the thing is, they don't have to be dudes right away. We don't need them to be. When you've got guys like Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas, and now again, hopefully, fingers crossed, Colby Young. But if you supplement Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch and Colby Young and Nitro Tuggle and Jacoby White, if you complement those guys with dudes like Talon Taylor, let's get his name wrong. Taylon Taylor, C.J. Wiley, Landon Roldan, those kind of guys. Now you see what I'm talking about? Now you've got a wide receiver room that has completely been flipped. I think we have arguably 4 or 5 guys. I don't know who of those 4 or 5 guys, I don't know which one will emerge as the true bona fide alpha of this wide receiver unit in 2025. But I think truly, we've got 4, maybe 5 guys, if you throw in some of those freshmen, that could potentially emerge as alpha. Some receiver guys, I know you say, well, freshmen, we don't know. Did we know about Ryan Williams before this year? I mean, that's a position, receiver, where freshmen routinely come in and make big-time impacts. Jeremiah Smith, right? I mean, I'm not saying that our receivers are on the same level as Jeremiah Smith. Like, that's a different level, dude. But the point stands, that's the position where freshmen come in, and if you can play right away, and you can be a dude. So I think we got 4 or 5 guys. You look at Noah Thomas, and you look at Colby Young, Taylor, Wiley, maybe even Zachariah Branch, who can be like the dude, alphas for Georgia at wide receiver. Now, the only caveat here, and there is a caveat, the only caveat is that none of them have been that guy yet. But when you watch them on tape, you see the potential is there. The production at A&M for Noah Thomas, the production at Miami for Colby Young, the production at USC for Zachariah Branch. You look at our freshmen, look at Scovey White, who didn't play a lot last year. You look at Nitro Tuggle, who didn't play a ton last year. The production hasn't been elite. We have to own that. Like that is true. You go on paper, it hasn't been elite. But I like to watch the tape, man. And when I watch the tape, I see dudes that have the potential to be elite if they're in the right situation. And I think that this is a better situation than all those guys were in a year ago. And Colby Young was in line. I think he was on the way to become our top receiver last year. And then it all went haywire, obviously, with the legal situation. And I think when you look at the quarterback situation, again, it's not necessarily going to be elite. I can't guarantee you that. But I think that the quarterback situation will be better this year for most of those guys than it was a year ago. Certainly, you look at Miller Moss, and you look at what A&M was working with, the kind of a revolving door at times at quarterback. You have Wegman, you bench him, then you bench Reed, you bring Wegman back in, then you bench Wegman again. There's no consistency there. So I think the quarterback situation will be better for those guys. I think the overall talent level is better for those guys. So now it's time to go to work, man. It's time to go to work. It's time for these wide receivers to turn what I think is elite potential into actual elite production on the field. But make no mistake about it. This wide receiver room for Georgia has been flipped. The weakness, the deficiency has been addressed, and it absolutely has the potential to be a strength and maybe even the strength for the Georgia offense in 2025. But all right, guys, thank you for listening to this episode. I appreciate you checking things out. Again, if you enjoy this content, go ahead and subscribe to this channel right now. I have a lot of content for you guys all off season long. We don't go dark during the offseason. We're going to have you guys cover your football fix all throughout the long, dark months of the college football offseason. We even talk some college basketball, so Georgia basketball, Georgia baseball, Georgia everything on the audio side of things. So if you're a Georgia sports guy or gal and you have a hard time finding coverage of Georgia basketball, Georgia baseball, even Georgia tennis sometimes, check out our podcast, wherever you get your podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple, Google Play, like whatever. Find it, guys. We have a ton of content for you guys. And, of course, we're always going to have your football fix. We never stray too far from football. But thank you guys again. Appreciate you. Subscribe, like, comment, all those things. I'm Tyler. And as always, go Dogs.